Hi, I'm Sasha Ayad. It's June 2024, and here's what's on my mind this month. Trans as a conversion experience. Everyone's blind spot about gender questioning youth. My client became incensed when I explained that she couldn't literally change sex. I've heard variations of this statement from dozens of therapists. Similarly, parents feel really certain that their scientifically oriented and logical kid will question his urgent desire for medicalization if he just hears the stats or learns about the unknown and known harms of becoming a medical patient for life. I've heard it argued by people I greatly admire that gender questioning youth need to be given all the information about where their distress might be coming from and what options they have to treat it. I've probably even said that myself one way or another. And that approach sounds really great, theoretically, especially in hindsight when considering the horrific treatment detransitioners experienced when they wanted to transition in the first place. It was all too easy for them to get on hormones and get approved for surgery when the providers failed to sufficiently explain the truth to them and chose to leave glaring omissions out from their informed consent process. So what's going on here? Detransitioners rightly wish that someone had explained things to them more honestly. But in practice, dysphoric kids in the therapy room reject our attempts to help them gain clarity. Here's the problem. Adopting a trans identity is rarely done based on rational deliberation or some sort of factual calculus. Identifying as trans is an emotional conversion experience. The person imbibes and integrates a radical new belief system and self-concept for deeply personal and spiritual reasons. Sometimes this conversion is more intrinsic, where it seems to emerge organically, like in classic gender dysphoria cases in youth. And sometimes the conversion is more extrinsic, like in the ROGD phenomenology with strong elements of pure online influence, school curricula, or other time spent learning about trans. So let's take an example which spares us the confusing gender smokescreen. Imagine you're a therapist and you have a new patient, Jose, who comes in to work with you. You happen to be an atheist, but Jose is a devout Christian. And for our purposes, he could be a devout Muslim, devout Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, or whatever. A few sessions into therapy, you come to understand that Jose's faith has gotten him through some really difficult times in the past. Yet you come to learn some facts that really worry you about a new church he's recently started attending. You think they use pretty manipulative tactics. Some of their teachings are very strange, and the church seems fringe and insular. But Jose, on the other hand, is really hopeful that this church is going to help him deepen his spirituality, and he's actually thrilled about getting more involved with it. So even with your initial formulation, you know there's a lot more to learn. Now, here's where the problem comes in with gender stuff. You would not begin talking to Jose about how it's scientifically impossible that Jesus turned water into wine. You would not use this or other examples to debunk and dismantle the validity of Christianity's holy book, and you would not start pushing Jose to question the tenets of his faith. Yet this is precisely what happens when therapists and parents try to critically scrutinize the tenets of trans and gender identity beliefs. For most young people, transition offers them a kind of promise. It may be a promise of salvation and rebirth, a promise of becoming more authentic, a promise of becoming who they were meant to be, or a promise of connection, community, and belonging. This is a profoundly spiritual movement, and understanding that is crucial if you love somebody who's adopted these beliefs. When I deliver presentations for therapists, when I have parent consults or give talks to parent groups, this is something I try to communicate, but sometimes it's hard to stick the landing. First of all, with conversion experiences, sometimes manipulation and coercion have been used, which of course gets people's backs up and raises suspicion. We can end up flattening the complexity of these experiences and come to see trans-identified kids as brainwashed zombies who are complete victims of a trans cult. Now, this framing, while it may contain some grains of truth, doesn't tell the full story, and that's especially true for older teens and young adults who are questioning their gender. The truth is that all conversion experiences are multidimensional and involve both positive and negative aspects. We don't like to think about this, but it's true. Another way we might frame it is that each person is attempting to meet a need through their identity. And the better we can appreciate that, the better able we will be to effectively connect and communicate with them. This is an inconvenient fact about complexity, but it helps explain how so many people claim that transition saved their life, while others claimed that it destroyed theirs. Conversion can also happen for those in the vicinity of the trans-identifying person, too. For example, cult expert Michael Langone explains that a person's initial conversion, especially when it's perceived to be extrinsic, is often received with a lot of skepticism by loved ones, unless the loved ones also come to adopt the same beliefs and then become converted themselves. Like the parents of trans kids who describe their own evolution from skeptic to enthusiastic supporter. I'll give you an example. There's a Texas mom, Kimberly Shapley, who came from a conservative Christian upbringing where gender nonconformity was severely frowned upon. As a mom, she had 4 boys, one of whom started behaving in a very feminine manner early in his childhood. From a young age, he claimed to be a princess and said he was a girl. Kimberly explains that in those early years, there were, quote, spankings, yelling matches, and endless prayers, end quote. She recalls, quote, I wasn't ready to face the fact that my 1.5-year-old child was a girl, end quote. Ultimately, I guess she did face it, though calling it a fact is all manner of wrong in my opinion. Once she adopted the belief that her son was really a girl, she was converted, now my words, not hers, and she became a staunch advocate for the idea of a trans kid. Now, generally, you don't hear me talking about specific families or people in these videos, but since Kimberly made her story so public, I thought it was a good example of how conversion can impact perceptions about gender dysphoria and what a family should do about it. Mainstream debates about trans issues tend to boil down to 2 different positions. One position says that a gender dysphoric person has a kind of psychiatric illness or a flawed perception of reality, and that they're too sick to understand what's really going on or make decisions about their medical care. The other perspective says that a person's trans identity is only for them to define, since it is such a personal and subjective experience. Therefore, questioning a trans-identified person's self-perception represents a cis-heteronormative bias, and therapists who do this are in gross violation of their role. You need to listen to trans people and let your client tell you who they really are. Furthermore, according to this perspective, a self-defined trans identity is a perfectly valid basis for approving physical and medical changes. Now, do you see how the second is a completely spiritual approach? And more difficult yet, the first perspective will almost never get through to somebody from the second camp. Langone again says, quote, an ideological antipathy towards the so-called medical model seemed to make some of these academics oppose in a knee-jerk manner any theories, however sophisticated, that suggest that conversions they observed were engineered or exploitative, end quote. Now here Langone wasn't even talking about gender, but the cult wars followed a similar pattern as what we're experiencing now with pediatric gender medicine. Fervent defenders of gender affirmation claim that it's categorically impossible to make a kid trans, and they refuse to consider that influence or online messages or confusing ideas about sex and gender might have contributed at all to a young person's gender questioning. Okay, so what do we do with all of this? On one hand, personally, the more I learn about gender medicine as a field, I understand how it's practiced, and I meet people who have felt harmed by the industry, the more antipathy I feel towards it. On the other hand, by placing gender medicine in the context of trans conversion, we can see that it operates to bring embodiment to the belief of gender identity. I don't personally hold those beliefs, but can understand how someone who does would feel deeply compelled to preserve these medical interventions. And sometimes this is the exact conflict taking place between trans-identified patients and their therapists, or gender-questioning youth and their parents. Look, I have written and spoken in many other places about the need for parents to step into their authority with children and teens, to take the reins and establish boundaries for health and safety. But outside of those kinds of decisions that parents can actually control, effective communication and connecting with a trans-identified person is a totally different story. In some rare cases, I have come across young people who are persuaded to think more critically by exposing them to contradictions and thinking errors and talking about the tenets of gender identity beliefs. But for the vast majority of families, trying to help their kids to be more rational just exacerbates the divide and pushes kids deeper into their spiritual quest. So, I invite you to learn more about spiritual and religious conversions, both the good and the bad. I suspect this is going to be much more helpful than poring over DSM criteria or debating the safety of cross-sex hormones. Of course, you can check out the rest of this month's Substack newsletter, where you can read the material that I just read here for you today. And I also discuss GenSpec's third conference in Lisbon, Portugal. I tell you about Suzanne O'Sullivan's amazing book on mystery illnesses, and I revisit an old newsletter that I wrote about attachment, and I update what I've learned about this topic since 2017. You can also read some of the excellent questions I answered in last month's live Q&A, including how do I challenge my child without betraying our trust, and why does my daughter seem to desist at home and then return to a trans identity at school? You can subscribe to the Substack by following the links below if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.